and you can have different framework content for the same product, but for different audiences. So for example, you may need to speak to women differently than you do to men to sell the product, right? If you're doing like, let's say outdoor sporting equipment, right? Women may need to be talked to differently than men, right? And they may, men may be like very impulsive and be like, yeah, love the shoe, gonna buy it. Women are gonna want to know a bit more about it maybe. Okay, today's episode we are going to be talking about a framework. And before we tell you what this framework's all about, we really want to preface why this would be important to you as a business owner. And we come across this, probably unbeknownst to us, very subtly, and a lot of times when clients are like, well, I don't really know what messaging to put out, I don't know what content to put out and all that kind of stuff. Really what you got to do is you got to frame where that content is going to be in that customer journey. Or prospect journey. And that's where this framework that we're going to be talking about today comes into play. And Jody's very well prepared for the episode. I know you can't see it. She's got a ton of notes. So, I want you to also, if you're listening to this, if you're not driving, but if you're sitting at an office, a desk somewhere in a hot tub, doesn't matter where you are. If you have the ability to take notes, you're going to want to do that today, at least to get the high level points of what we're going to be talking about. Mm-hmm. So Jody, I know you come across this because you're creating content a lot for people. Mm-hmm. And we had a client last week who, was struggling with, what content to put out there. And we always say, put your best content out. And then they had, some hesitations or reservations about, giving away all this content and where it really fit. Mm-hmm. And we're in an era now where, keeping your content or a portion of it kind of hostage, where you're kind of like baiting people and saying, okay, well, here's a little bit, but in order to get the rest, you got to buy from me or mm-hmm. become a client. It is really, it's not a good thing to do.
Yeah, it's definitely ineffective with all of the resources out there. You can learn anything on YouTube. Mm-hmm. Now you can search up anything you could ever imagine that you don't know how to do. I do that. Mm-hmm. If I don't know how to do something at home or building something, you just look up a YouTube video. So there's no sense in hiding the content that you have, because it's just going to defer people to other resources and other people. Absolutely.
And, just think about yourself. If you are looking for a solution to a problem, right? The first thing that happens is you become aware that there's a problem that you need mm-hmm. to fix. And that could be anything. I mean, maybe your car is starting to break down. It's like, okay, now I'm aware that I should start to look for other vehicles. Or, you've got a sore ankle, and now it's like, how do I fix that, right? It's that whole awareness stage. Mm-hmm. And that's the number one, the top of this process that we're going to be talking about first. Is awareness. And a lot of times, if you've got a new product or service that nobody knows about, meaning it's just something new, you are really having to make them aware first that this exists, mm-hmm. and then why they would want it. Okay. Mm-hmm. So that's the top level of this framework. It's a 4-part framework, and we'll tell you the rest as we go through. But the top one is awareness. And a lot of times, if you're running ads, this is done through video content, educational content, all that kind of stuff that you want to put out there. And its purpose is not to sell, right? You're not mm-hmm. running sales ads and everything along those lines. And, that usually falls in things like articles, webinars, podcasts, like you're listening to right now, is all awareness. I mean, mm-hmm. if you're listening to this and you had no idea of this framework, by the end of it, you became aware of it.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Yeah, it's all about that message of like, read this.
Mm-hmm.
You want to stand out. You want to provide a reason for them to take notice, something that will catch their attention, whether that be, like a statistic, a fact, any resource that would, provide value to them.
Mm-hmm. You said statistic, you see these a lot of times, Instagram and things like that, people put together these stats, graphics. It's, mm-hmm. like 96% or 68%, we do a lot in the financial industry. And a lot of times, I don't know what the exact number is, but one that's very prominent is that, 68% of Canadians, don't have an estate plan, right? Mm-hmm. They don't have a will. They don't have this. Now, if you're in that space, when you say something like that, and you don't have one of those, you're like, oh, I'm part of that. Yeah. Like, this is a problem. You become aware of that, right?
Exactly.
So bringing those stats to the forefront are going to be key in that. So you have any questions that you've come up with in your notes around the awareness stage?
I guess other than advertising, because I think that that's the obvious direction to go, how else can you gain attention or awareness? What can you include in your brand awareness strategy other than just simply advertising?
That's a fantastic question. I mean, anywhere that people will see you, and it doesn't have to necessarily be your product or service. It could be you or your business. So, you look at all these different touch points to resonate, to kind of bring home what a brand is. Think about, vehicle decals, your voicemail, signage, your website, just being in the community. Maybe you have a branded jacket and you're part of the community, you're volunteering, right? That is all awareness as to who you are. When I first started out here in this location, and I've been here 10 years now, I'd start to go to trade shows. And what was really funny was people would come by and they're like, yeah, I know exactly where you are. I drive by there all the time because I used to have a sign outside. And the really funny part was some people would say, I see all your vehicles around town. I was like, wow, that's awesome. I only had one, right? But the awareness that I was out there so much that they kept seeing it, they thought there were multiple vehicles, right? So it's all awareness. So when you think of marketing, on a local stage here, people will think of us because they've seen the brand around, right? For sure. Now, once you've got that awareness, so, you become aware of that problem or that solution and what it is, now you want to try to drive people to interest, right? So we go from awareness into interest. And what that means is they start to validate, maybe I could use this, or maybe I want that. It's a lot easier from a towards purchase, something of luxury, right? So, let's go back to the example of a vehicle. Your vehicle's like clunking and banging, and you're always kind of in the shop, and you're like, I think I can afford another vehicle. Now you're going to want it, and you're going to want it really, really well. So you're going to start to look around and start to say, okay, well, what are my options that are out there? And that's where your website really comes into play, that web content. People are going to start to search around and see who's out there to do that. And that comes into also being able to have lead magnets on your website. So when they go there, you get them into your funnel, you start to nurture them, and along those lines, get them subscribed to your newsletter, social media, your blogs, email campaigns, all that stuff is in that interest, right? It's like that first date where they're really trying to see who you are.
Yeah, and see, I think it's important in this stage to understand that you can gain attention. It's actually quite easy to gain attention. Advertisements, even throughout my life, seeing advertisements, I've remembered a whole bunch that are completely irrelevant to me. But if you want to gain customers from that and build that interest, that next step of after having their attention, there has to be something that they can relate to, or something that's meaningful to them or emotional to them, or talking about their problem or their problem that needs solving. I kind of think of it as a stage where it's like, yeah, I have your attention, so now look at this, it affects you, so you need to keep reading. It's not just like, hey, read this. It affects you, so keep reading kind of thing.
Yeah. So you think about it, it's like, here's a problem that's out there. Do you have it? And now it's like, hey, we help with this problem, right? Not like buy from us. We're still not selling at this phase, right? We're trying to start to say, okay, come and drink our Kool-Aid, come and see, kind of play in our sandbox along those lines. So, just to reiterate, you go from awareness to interest. Is there anything in the interest stage that you kind of would like to come across in a question?
Well, I think in the interest phase, it's important to ask yourself a couple questions. So in this stage, the content strategy really comes into play. You need to start thinking about not only what content you're putting out to build that interest and then to eventually move them to the next stage, but you also have to think about where. Also social proof, because once somebody gains interest, what's the first thing they're going to do? They're going to go looking for you online. So again, like you mentioned, your website, where are your reviews? Where are you posting them? Do you have any reviews or testimonials? Social media pages, are you making sure that you have a significant amount of content that, proves that you're reputable and should be trusted? So I think that's a very important part of the interest stage. And then also you just have to think about the simple fact of how can you gain interest.
And this is a great stage to start to think about what questions might people have, right? Those FAQs. If you've been in business long enough, you probably know what the questions your clients have had in their sales process, and that's where you can start to create content around that. Have the FAQ on the website, because when people are going to start to look at you, they're going to start to want answers to those questions, right? Which is key. So our third stage in this is really kind of where people start to really validate, are you a viable option? And this is the desire stage, right? So, let's go back again to the vehicle stage. Awareness was, hey, my vehicle's crap. It's starting to break down. Interest is like, okay, I think I need to look at a new vehicle. You go around, you start to kind of date the different dealerships and check them out, and maybe you start to then go and say, okay, I've narrowed it down to like 2 different types of vehicles. Then you're going to start to desire those, right? And now you're starting to go a little heavier into starting to find out what it is about that dealership, that vehicle, the service, right? The quality. The reviews are really going to start to come into play in this. And you can get into this where people are going to start to consume more content. You don't have to be selling a physical product, right? Maybe you're a coach or a consultant, but developing things like white papers, ebooks, brochures, having longer form content. People are going to start to really see, are you really worth, or can you do what you say you're going to do?
And, to add on to that, I think it's really important to show examples of, success stories of your services, people who have greatly benefited from your products, whatever it might be, whatever problem you're solving. You need to put that on a pedestal and show them exactly why they should want it and why they should desire it. A lot of times that's done through before and afters. I'm sure you can think of many examples where you've seen before and after and you're like, wait, that's impressive,
right.
And it starts to slowly convince you that you do actually want the product or service.
There's a psychological thing that happens in people's minds called aspirational identity, where they see something, let's just use acne, right? I mean, because it's very visual, right? It's painful, it's emotional, that type of stuff. If you're in that stage where you have that, those breakouts all the time and you're trying to find stuff out as to how can I fix this, you find a couple of companies and then you see these before and afters, you're starting to desire that. You're going to see the afters and you're going to be like, that's what I want, right? I'm aspiring to identify with that, right? And once somebody can grab a hold of that feeling, right? When you connect with somebody emotionally in the sales process, it's so much easier to close that sale and get a customer that way, especially if you got those before and afters. And they don't have to be visual. They could be just, in the financial world, it could be somebody that's in debt. Now they hear, case studies and stories of somebody who, now can take family vacations every year.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And in the sales industry too, even working retail, they talk a lot about feature versus benefit. And so just to kind of touch on that, because I think it's quite relevant in the desire stage, you talk about, you can say that a jacket, for example, is waterproof, but touching on the fact of how it's going to impact them, saying it will help you stay dry. Instead of saying that it's waterproof is so much more effective. And that's just one example, but just because it plays on people's emotions and that's what the desire stage is truly all about. You have those rare products or services that are completely utilitarian where they only talk about usefulness, but that's pretty rare. I think that a mix of both, showing its usefulness as well as playing on that emotional side of things.
Yeah, and people buy those benefits, right? That's what they want. That's the outcome of it. They don't necessarily buy, the feature. The feature is a means to that benefit. And coming back to that rain jacket idea, it comes down to the creative messaging and the way that you portray it. You can say it in 10 different ways. It could be, like, do you hate that feeling when you're out for a walk and suddenly you're caught in the rain? And then you got to come home and change all your clothes because everything under your jacket is soaked, right? Everybody knows that feeling. It's disgusting. You hate it, right? But now you can put in this jacket that, like, our jackets are breathable, right? They're fashionable, but also they're 100% water resistant, right? So now you're not selling the feature first. You're selling the benefit and connecting to an experience that somebody has had and can relate to along the way. One thing also with the desire side is this is a great way to get people to start to become part of a community, so to speak. And I'm going to come back to bringing in a previous client where, if the end goal is to work one-on-one in a consulting business, maybe in your desire stage, you have a community, a Facebook group, an online group, whatever it is that you can actually invite people into to start to feel what it's like to work with you. And that's where you're working on that one-to-many phase. And a lot of times the price point of entry is a lot less than working one-to-one for obvious reasons. But that's like, they're not ready to make that full-blown step yet. Here's a step back, right? It's a great way to add kind of a sales level into that desire. Now, lastly, the last one in there is
action.
Action. That's right. So action is really where they're going to start to pull the trigger, make the decision. Yes, this is the company, this is the person, this is the product that I want to work with, that I want to buy, or want to invest in, whatever your goal is that's there. And that's where people will start to really, dive even deeper, and they might be going into fuller, longer consults with you. And that's where you need to really have a sales process and a sales stage, and understand, how do you sell? It's okay to ask for the sale in that stage, right?
Now, I also want to touch on the fact that this doesn't always mean a purchase or a sale, right? There can be the AIDA framework for signing up for a newsletter. That can be the call to action and the action that they take from that process. But most times it's going to repeat itself. So then you're going to have a whole different AIDA framework for an actual purchase decision, if it was for a service, for a consultation, or whatever it might be. But I think that's something that's important to remember, is that it doesn't necessarily have to be a purchase. It can be, getting your lead magnet, finally deciding to sign up for the newsletter, like I mentioned, or going to the webinar, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm going to tell you an example that I personally had with a product. And it came around, the whole pandemic that we had. I love Howard Stern. I listen to him on Sirius Radio when I'm driving. And there was an ad in there for a company called Phone Soap. And what it was I was like, I had no idea what this was, right? So I heard the ad and I was like, okay, what is it? So I'm listening. So I'm in that attention phase. This is a very short sales cycle for me, but they went through all the phases, in that process. So what is it? They told me it's an infrared. You put your phone in it, close it up. 3 minutes later, all the bacteria has been cleaned off of it, right? So I was like, I like that, right? Now I'm interested in it. And then I started to go to the website, phonesoap.com. I checked it out, read the reviews, saw the social proof, saw the price point. I was like, now I desired it. I wanted it. And they made it real easy. It was cheap. There was a promotion there, and I took action. And this happened probably within 10 minutes. From the moment I first heard the ad, I went through the entire framework model there to buy that one single product, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing, is depending on your business, your industry, product, service, whatever it might be, the AIDA framework is always going to look different. It's always going to be different timeline. Different steps might have higher importance or higher priority. There's just a lot of variation, and that's why you have to actually take the time to sit down and write it out and actively think about what your customer is thinking through each stage and what message you want to get across to them.
Yeah, and your messaging is going to change in each stage, and leveraging tools, for Facebook ads and retargeting and having the different messaging come out, especially if you got email newsletters, text messaging, marketing, and all that kind of stuff. It's the way that you talk with people at those different stages. And I'd strongly suggest that you're talking with people and not talking at them, right? So you want to have means of communication that they can ask questions and respond back. So, one little thing is, if you're going to do text messaging, make sure it's a system that if they reply back, you get that and you can reply back to them. Nobody wants just to be blasted with one-way text messages too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my biggest advice, both from a marketing perspective as well as a consumer perspective, on this, call to action phase, is making it easy for them to move forward and make a decision. Having links, having buttons and emails to click, providing the information right there, the sign up pop up, just making sure that you're not losing people simply because they're too lazy or don't want to type in your website and go look for the sign up page. Just make it as easy as possible. And that right there improves your chances of them actually taking action from your call to action.
Mm-hmm. And one mistake that people will make when they first try to implement this is they start to figure out how long should it take somebody to get through attention, through interest, through desire, right? Mm-hmm. So let's say, you say, okay, well, my intention content, I want people to see that, and then I want them to see it for like a week, and then we're going to hopefully transition them. People will move at different speeds through this. So while your intention may be to educate them first, they may get to that desire stage very quickly, and you want to make it easy for them to be able to, make that purchase. So, if you're sending out emails that are educational in means after they subscribe, then you want to also have maybe in the footer a link where they can actually go and book that consult. It's not primary in the content where you're not screaming, hey, this is what I want you to do. But if they went and looked for it, it was there and a way to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just touching on something, because I think it's important to acknowledge, this framework in the past was kind of seen as the be-all, end-all of marketing and whatnot. But now with, especially modern technology and digital marketing, there's a lot missing from this framework. So firstly is the targeting, right? Before you even think about attention, interest, desire, action, you have to think about who you want, whose attention you want, whose desire do you want. And sometimes that can just come into play when you're starting to build interest, because the people who see the advertisement, they have, sure, maybe you gain their attention, but then as soon as it comes to the part where they're supposed to relate to it, they just scroll past it or, click through it. But I do think it's important to acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of gaps in this framework that do need to be filled in.
Absolutely. And you can have different framework content for the same product, but for different audiences. Exactly. So for example, you may need to speak to women differently than you do to men to sell the product, right? If you're doing like, let's say outdoor sporting equipment, right? Women may need to be talked to differently than men, right? And they may, men may be like very impulsive and be like, yeah, love the shoe, gonna buy it. Women are gonna want to know a bit more about it maybe, right? Different geographical areas too. So keeping in mind, you need to really understand where your client base is coming from, and try to become as much like them in your thoughts beforehand, and figuring that out. And that's why when we're going to implement this with clients, this is not the first thing, right? This is coming down that phase in the marketing stage. We really need to understand, who are we selling to? Who is that person? Why would they want to work with you? Those type of things. Why do they want to buy your product, which is extremely key.
Yeah. And if you're just starting out with the AIDA framework, it's a good idea to have multiple versions of it and do split testing like you do with advertisements. There's no shame in that trial and error of marketing. That's what you have to do to be successful, really, and find that sweet spot in your marketing efforts. So I think doing split testing, A/B testing with different AIDA frameworks is a good place to start.
Absolutely. And if you want to learn more about this, you can hop on Google and search AIDA, AIDA framework. There's a ton of examples there. You can hop over to our website. We're going to actually be posting a blog post, which will probably be active by the time this episode and you're hearing this. And I'll actually put a link to it in the show notes with this as well. So any final questions before we hop off?
Oh, yes.
Oh, great. Here we go. Pages of questions.
So the years that you've been in marketing,
yes,
and obviously you've been aware of this framework for a long time.
That's interest. Right. Look at that.
What stage, in your opinion and in your experience, is the most difficult to achieve successfully?
That's a good question. I think for a lot of people, it falls in that stage of the desire, right? People struggle with how to make people really want the product or service. And it's because maybe they're very close to it, right? They know a lot of stuff about like the how they do it, how they deliver the product, what it does. For us, we know how we work with clients. So it's hard to identify and portray like the why. Like, why would somebody want to work with somebody that does it this way, right? So you can do great from getting attention with all the targeting, get that out, get people to be like, yeah, that's great. But then you have that desire stage where it's like, how do you do that? And I think that's going to be the hardest one for people to come across and do. Because I think a lot of people struggle with talking about themselves and doing that, right? They're really focused on, like, I know my product, I know my business, and to be able to step on the outside is a big challenge.
Yeah, and I think the building desire phase too is also that kind of turning point where it actually turns into something tangible, I guess, where there's actually a desire specifically for your product or service. So it would make sense that would be the most challenging.
And a great way to kind of get some intel on that is when you start to get clients and customers asking them, what was it about us or what was it about this product that made you purchase it? And they'll start to tell you, and that's the desire that they had for it.
Exactly. Yeah. So with businesses that you've worked with, what do you think is the most overlooked phase of AIDA? What do you think people tend to kind of just brush off, but it actually has a significant importance?
I think a lot of times people will start to jump right to the interest phase. Right? They'll put their content out and they're like, everybody needs this, right? I hear that all the time. Like, everybody needs me. Real estate's one of the ones where it's oversaturated. There's a ton of people and they struggle with standing out and coming up with why they are super, super important. The attention phase is really that top one that people, they don't separate that between interest. They go right to that interest. And really what it needs to be is bringing everybody to the attention of what you do or what you can solve and that kind of stuff, and putting that out there. And that's, it's the biggest one. It's an inverted, it's a funnel, and the biggest stage is at the top. So, when you look at it, the audience size, the numbers are going to be proportionate to that. So you need to spend money now to get that out there. It's going to be the advertising. It's going to be, social media. And it's not going to be just doing organic. You cannot create your accounts and just start posting on it and get huge numbers. You're going to have to spend money for that, right? You're not going to necessarily get a return on that immediately, but you need to be building those audiences and then have the rest of the stages in place so that when they start to engage with it, then you start to show them that interest content. Then you start to talk in the desire once they go that way.
Right.
Right.
So I know we touched on targeting being something that isn't included, but do you find that there's anything else that's missing from the AIDA model there, or any steps that, in your opinion and in your experience, you've kind of added in as you went?
Well, there's a lot of talk, if you follow some of the big thought leaders in this space, that, the model of the funnel, while it was like the prime method, right? It's got that bottleneck, comes down to the action. But now it's more of an hourglass, right? So we'll start to spread out, and it's the follow-up after. Because, it's very costly to start to keep finding new people. And the people you do work with are the best sources of new business, right? So you have to have, other steps in there for follow-up, getting those testimonials on the bottom end, and really continuing to have people, keep desiring the work that you do, right? The best customers or the best new customers are the ones that you already have, right?
Yeah.
Because you just sell them something else.
Yeah.
You develop new products for them that you've already come across and broken down that wall, that barrier of do they like me? Do they know us? Right. And it's like, how can we develop it even
that
further?
Relationship is already established.
Yeah.
And the trust.
Right. So it doesn't end at action. Right. I think that's really where it starts to ramp up. And you've got you're basically a very committed sales force, and you hear these terms like building your tribe and building, this whole loyalty fan base. And, that's where loyalty programs really, stemmed from, is once they bought, now it's like, how do we keep them?
Yeah.
Right. And how do we get them telling other people?
Right. All right. So this is my last question.
Okay.
All of my notes have been stated. All right. So what is the most important step to get perfect in the AIDA framework?
I'm going to basically say you'll never be perfect.
Okay.
Right. So there's like, in marketing, there is never perfection. There's nothing that we could ever say or do to say, okay, this is 100%, follow all these steps, you will get this result 100%. I think what you need to do is you need to always be looking at what you've done and then, iterating on that. Right. So, looking at not saying, okay, well, I've done it once. I'm going to set it out into the world and I'm going to forget about it, right? You got to look at, the attention. Is it getting attention? Are people moving to interest? Maybe my messaging's off, so I need to change that a bit more. And you're not going to know exactly 100% what that is. You just need to try and put content out there. Now, if we're going to use Facebook as an example, their goal is advertisers, right? They want people to spend money to advertise with them, and they want to make it easier for it. Up until, probably within the last year, you had to figure out how to create different ads and test different copy and to different headlines and all that kind of stuff. But now they have dynamic content elements where you can create one ad, upload 5 different headlines, 5 different photos, 5 different descriptions, and it's going to automatically start to split test combinations to see what's resonating with people. And then it's going to report back and say, this photo with this headline, this description is getting the most attention, the most clicks and everything. And then you can be like, perfect. Now, how can I take that and make more iterations on that one to see if I can get that even higher, right? Mm-hmm. So there's tools out there to allow you to move along that phase. So, coming back to your question, don't get hung up on trying to be perfect. Try to do better than you did yesterday.